Okay, we'll start with the Mangalacharan. Om Ajnana Timinantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuruniltamena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah Sri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Yudapata Kamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavasya Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vidam Tamste Jivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishaka Nitamscha हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपीशा गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमस्ते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी ऋषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यो च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Okay, we will look at the sixth verse from chapter 12 of the first canto. Kim te kama suraspraha mukunda manaso dvija adijarul mudam rajna suditasya yate tare किम ते काम सुरस्पर्ह मुकुंद मनसो द्विजा अधिजारुर्मुदं राज्ञा सुदीतस्य यते तरे किम ते काम सुरस्पर्ह मुकुंद मनसो द्विजा अधिजारुर्मुदं राज्ञा सुदीतस्य यते तरे किम ते काम सुरस्पर्ह मुकुंद मनसो द्विजा अधिजारुर्मुदं राज्ञा सुदीतस्य यते तरे. Okay. Wants to recite?
Can I try, bro?
Okay, bro.
Kim te kama sura swarasha mukunda manaso dvija aji jaharur mudam rajna sudidatsya yada tare. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, bro. Next.
Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
May I try?
Yeah, sure.
Kim te kama sura sparna mukunda manaso advidya aditятrum mudam rajna usadranasya yatrerata.
Shuditasya yate tare.
Okay, sorry, Babu. Quite difficult.
Okay. Next. Hare Krishna. Next person. Okay. We'll proceed with the synonyms. Kim te kama surasparha mukunda manaso dvija adijarur mudam rajna suditasya yate tare. Kim, what for? Te, all those. Kama, objects of sense enjoyment. Sura, of the denizens of heaven. Sparha, aspirations. Mukunda manasa, of one who is already God conscious. Dvija, O Brahmanas. Adijaru, could satisfy. Mudam, pleasure. Rajna, of the king. Shuditasya, of the hungry. Yata, as it is. Itare, in other things. Translation. O Brahmanas, the opulence of the king was so enchanting that the denizens of heaven aspired for it, but because he was absorbed in the service of the Lord, nothing could satisfy him except the Lord's service. Okay, so this this verse is actually a continuation of the previous verse, verse number 5. So here, Who are the Brahmanas? Here, someone is addressing the Brahmanas. So, who are the Brahmanas here? Okay, in the beginning of this chapter, in the beginning of the chapter, in the first verse, Shaunaka Uvacha. So, Shaunaka Rishi, the leader of the chief of the sages of Nayusharanya, he was the one who started by inquiring specifically about Emperor Parikshit. So, in the first few verses, the conversation is still focused on the background of Parikshit Maharaj, especially there are descriptions about the Pandavas. So here the Brahmanas, obviously it refers to the sages of Naimisharanya, because in text 4, in text 1, Shaunaka Rishi was inquiring specifically about Maharaj Parikshit, and in text 4, Sutta Goswami has already started to reply to Shaunaka Rishi's inquiry. So in text 6, he is actually addressing all the sages at Naimisharanya by saying, "O Brahmanas." So last week, we saw the descriptions about Maharaj Yudhishthira. News even in text 5, news even reached the celestial planets about Maharaj Yudhishthira's worldly possessions, the sacrifices by which he would attain a better destination, his queen, his stalwart brothers, his extensive land, his sovereignty over the planet Earth, his fame, etc. So the material opulence of the Pandavas, particularly Maharaj Yudhishthira as the king of Hastinapura, though his kingdom was based in Hastinapura, the entire empire was spread all over Jambudvipa. So such was his material opulence, and therefore even the denizens of the heavens, they were they were envying or admiring Maharaj Yudhishthira's material opulence. But in this verse is also related to the previous verse, verse number 5. So in this verse, it stated, "O Brahmanas, the opulence of the king was so enchanting that the denizens of heaven aspired for it." So as stated in the verse, Suras Parha, aspired by the Suras, the denizens of heaven, the heavenly beings, the Suras. So the opposite of Suras, Asuras. But because he was absorbed in the service of the Lord, he here refers to Maharaj Yudhishthira. But because Maharaj Yudhishthira was absorbed in the service of the Lord, nothing could satisfy him except the Lord's service. So as we saw last week, this material opulence, which was attained after the war, it was actually nothing new to the Pandavas. They have seen the best and the worst sides of life. So even before the war, even before their exile, they were ruling they were ruling from Indraprastha. So they were enjoying all their material opulence, but due to the deceit of the Kauravas, they lost everything and they had to go on exile. So even from their example, from the example of the Pandavas, we can clearly see how transient is this material opulence. So since they have seen the material opulence and also the complete lack of it, so they were never attracted to any material opulence. They were always attracted to towards the service towards the Supreme Lord, because the material opulence did not stay with them all the time, but the Supreme Lord was, he always stood with them even in their most trying times. Only by his mercy they were able to overcome all their problems, and finally Maharaj Yudhishthira could be enthroned as the king of Hastinapura after the war. So it was all solely due to the mercy of the Supreme Lord. Purport: there are two things in the world which can satisfy living beings. When one is materially engrossed, he is satisfied only by sense gratification. But when one is liberated from the condition of the material modes, he is satisfied only by rendering loving service for the satisfaction of the Lord. So it is either one and not both. Either we are always attracted towards material sense gratification, or if we are completely purified from all the material contamination, then we will be attracted towards bhakti. We will be attracted by devotional service towards the Supreme Lord. And that is actually our true nature. So as stated here, this means that the living being is constitutionally a servitor and not one who is served. So whether we like it or not, our true identity is that we are meant to be servitors, we are meant to be servants. So either we have to be the servants of Krishna under the influence of his superior spiritual energy in the spiritual world, or we can be servants of Krishna's inferior material energy in the material world. So we were actually deluded due to our foolishness. We were thinking that we could become enjoyers and controllers by coming to this material world, and it can never happen because even now we are being exploited by material nature. So from our original superior position, when we were in the spiritual world, in our original transcendental body, so we were in a much more superior position compared to the position we are in right now. So we were actually thinking that we could become enjoyers and controllers, but it can never happen because our constitutional position is that we are always meant to be servitors or servants. So either we'll be servants of Maya, or we'll be servants of Krishna directly under his care directly. Even when we are being the servants of Maya, even then we are still under the dominance of Krishna, because even Maya itself is merely a byproduct of Krishna's inferior material energy. So this desire to become enjoyers and controllers, it has actually been a completely futile attempt, because our constitutional position does not allow us to it simply does not allow us to become the one who is served. So we are always meant to be servants. So even after coming to this material world, though we were deluded into thinking that we can be enjoyers and controllers, actually we are being enjoyed and controlled by Maya in this material world. And that is the main reason why we are constantly suffering from the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, and also many other miseries, like the threefold miseries: Adhyatmic, Adidevik, Adibhautik. So this is actually these are all like self-inflicted because we are the ones who were deluded into thinking that we can be happy and we can enjoy in this material world. So in the process, we have actually degraded ourselves from our original position in the spiritual world to a much more degraded condition now. From having a transcendental body, which was never subject to the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi, now we are forced, we have been forced to undergo transmigration of the soul from one body to another in all the 84 lakh material bodies. So it is clearly a huge degradation from our original constitutional position. And even to realize this, it has actually taken so long for us to be in a position where we could actually realize our foolishness. Because before attaining this human form of life, we were not in the position to realize our current fallen condition. We were not even able to realize that we are conditioned souls, conditioned under the three modes of material nature, because only in the human form of life we are blessed with the ability to engage in spiritual inquiry and devotional service. So since time immemorial, we have been our soul has been transmigrating from one material body to another. We have been traveling in all the 84 lakh material bodies until finally we were blessed to attain this precious human form of life. And now, again, due to the mercy of our acharyas, we are now in the position to actually realize our original constitutional position. Now, through this spiritual knowledge propagated by our acharyas, with the mercy of Krishna, so we are able to understand through self-realization. We are finally able to understand that we are not this material body and that we are spirit souls. So that itself is the first step towards liberating ourselves from this material bondage. So beyond understanding that we are not this material body and that we are spirit souls, beyond that, we also have to understand that we are always meant to be the eternal servants of Krishna. Because even now, in this, in our current position, as conditioned souls in this material world, we are still being servants of Krishna, whether we like it or not. We wanted to enjoy in this material world, and that's why we left our original position from the spiritual world to become enjoyers and controllers in this material world. But whether we like it or not, even now we are still being the servants of Krishna through because Krishna is still dominating us through his inferior material energy. Previously, we were under the care of his superior spiritual energy, and now we have actually degraded ourselves for nothing, because our obsession towards becoming enjoyers and controllers will never it can never be realized, because our constitutional position is meant to be Krishna's servants only. So even now we are still being Krishna's servants, but it's just that we are being the servants of Krishna's inferior material energy. So either way, we are always going to remain as Krishna's servants only, but we have degraded ourselves from our original position for nothing due to our foolishness. All this material contamination, it only resulted in getting us degraded from our original position in the spiritual world. But our current status is still the same. We are still servants of Krishna. We are still servants of Maya, which itself is part of Krishna's inferior energy. So, regardless of whether we like it or not, we can never be enjoyers or controllers. We can only remain as Krishna's servants. So even if we are so happy to be in this material world, so if we are still not able to understand that we are actually suffering and being exploited by material nature, so still we can still remain in this material world because Krishna never interferes in the minute individual freedom of living entities. So we are free to choose whether we want to keep fooling ourselves after transmigrating over 84 lakh material bodies. So if we still want to continue fooling ourselves into thinking that we are actually enjoying in this material world, so Krishna will never object to that. He will always get the next apartment ready, meaning the next material body. So based on our current activities, he'll prepare the next apartment or the next material body, which is suitable for us based on our current activities. So now we have been blessed with this human form of life, this prestigious apartment, because our past activities were meritorious enough to help us in attaining this wonderful opportunity. But if we do not appreciate this opportunity and to really liberate ourselves from the material entanglement, then Krishna will always be happy to accommodate us so that we can remain in this material world as long as we want. Of course, for those who do not realize that they have to really liberate themselves from this material world, even after getting the human form of life, it is extremely unfortunate. Being illusioned by the conditions of the external energy, one falsely thinks himself to be the served, but actually he is not served. He is servant of the senses, like lust, desire, anger, avarice, pride, madness, and intolerance. So, due to our material contamination, we were always obsessed to enjoy material sense gratification. So, this obsession towards material sense gratification itself is a form of slavery because we are being slaves to our material senses. The material senses are also part of the 24 Mahatattva elements, meaning the material elements. Our original identity is that we are spirit souls. The spirit soul is always superior to the material elements. The spiritual world is superior to the material world. But our current position is so degraded to the point where we have completely forgotten our original identity, that we are spirit souls. We have forgotten that our original identity is a very superior identity compared to the material senses, and we have actually chosen to be slaves to our material senses. So it all starts from this obsession. This obsession to enjoy material sense gratification is the main gateway to total destruction, because it is also stated in the Gita, chapter 2, verse 62 and 63. In those two verses, we know that in all the verses there are 4 lines, the 4 padas. So in Gita 2.62 and 63 particularly, in those two verses there are 8 lines total. So in those two verses, they describe about the 8 steps towards total destruction. So the verse starts like this, 2.62, Gita 2.62. Jayato Vishyan Punsam Sangateshu Upajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamat Kama Krojo Abhijayate. 2.63 Krodhat Bhavati Sammoha Sammoha Smriti Viprama Smriti Brahmshat Bhuttinasho Bhuttinashat Pranashyati. So in 2.62, the first line, Jayato Vishyan Pumsam, it refers to contemplation on sense objects. We have our material senses, but every sense is always looking for enjoyment through sense objects. Our material senses, they have to act upon, they have to act on sense objects to enjoy material sense gratification. So the first, in the two verses, the 8 lines describe the 8 steps towards total destruction. The last line, Buddhi Nashat Pranashati, means when a person's intelligence is destroyed, it leads to total destruction. But the starting point itself is Jayato Vishyan Pumsam. It all starts from contemplation on sense objects. Jayato Vishyan Pumsam Sangateshu Upajayate. So when we contemplate on sense objects, it leads to attachment. Sangateshu Upajayate. It from contemplation on sense objects, it leads to attachment. So that is the second stage. First stage is contemplation on sense objects. Second stage is attachment. Jayato Vishyan Pumsam Sangateshu Upajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamat. From attachment, it leads to kama or lust, the lusty desires. Sangat Sanjayate Kama, Kama Krodo Abhijayate. So from kama, it leads to krodha, because when we are so obsessed with contemplating on sense objects, it leads to attachment, second stage. Third stage, the lusty desires. Then fourth stage is anger, because when that lusty desire remains unfulfilled, it leads to it agitates our mind, and it gets unleashed as anger. Kama Krodho Abhijayate. Then in 2.63, Krodhat Bhavati Sammoha. From anger, it leads to bewilderment. Krodhat Bhavati Sammoha. Sammoha, bewilderment. Sammohat Smriti Vibrama. Bewilderment causes disruption of memory. Smriti Vibrama. Smriti Brahmshat Bhuttinasho. When our memory is disrupted, it also disrupts our intelligence. Smriti Brahmshat Bhuttinasho. So our intelligence also gets disrupted. The last line, the last stage, Buddhi Nashat Pranashyati. When our intelligence is lost, it leads to total destruction. So this is what has actually led to our total destruction, in the sense that we were we were originally in a much more superior position in the spiritual world, but today we have we find ourselves in this contaminated and degraded position due to these 8 steps towards destruction. So when we were having our superior spiritual body, the transcendental body, we started to contemplate on sense objects. We were running after material sense gratification. So it all started from that first stage. Then it proceeded over the 8 stages. And now our current position is the result of total destruction from our original position. So these 8 stages towards total destruction, starting from merely contemplating on sense objects. So this is described in the two verses in Gita, 2.62 and 2.63. So despite the fact that we are spirit souls and we belong to the Supreme Lord's spiritual energy, despite the fact that our original position is such an exalted position, meaning we are qualitatively similar to the Supreme Lord, still such is our degradation. When we compare with our current position now, we have become slaves to our material senses. These material senses are nothing but dead matter, because whatever senses we have now, our material senses, it will all get destroyed once this body is destroyed. And depending on our current activities, Krishna will prepare for us our next material body. So in that material body will be given different types of senses based on the kind of activities that we are indulging in now in this present life. So only if we utilize this current human form of life to always be engaged in devotional service, then we can regain our original transcendental body, which can be used to continue our devotional service towards Krishna in the spiritual world. Otherwise, if we remain slaves to our material senses, then Krishna will only give us another material body. So like that, again, we'll be trapped in the cycle. So we'll keep transmigrating from one material body to another. So if for any person to be degraded to that level, it is extremely unfortunate, because after gaining this human form of life, we should preferably, our next destination should be Goloka. But if we fail, it is only due to our own foolishness, because of our utter disregard to the instructions of our acharyas. So not just instructions of our recent acharyas, because the entire disciplic succession, it actually starts from the root is Krishna himself. So it all started from him. So if we completely disregard the instructions of Krishna, which have been conveyed to us by our acharyas, so if we completely disregard all these instructions, then we do not deserve to get our original transcendental body. So that is why it is completely foolish to remain slaves to our material senses, because only that one spark of contemplating on sense objects, even the material senses are dead matter. So the the sense objects are also similarly dead matter. So when we are enslaved by this dead matter, so we are actually signing up for to be permanently enslaved in this material world. So despite the fact that our original identity is that we are spirit souls, if we keep running behind this dead matter, then the material world will be the best place for us. We do not deserve to go back to the spiritual world. So mere contemplation on sense objects only becomes the first stage towards total destruction over the 8 stages. When one is in his proper senses by attainment of spiritual knowledge, he realizes that he is not the master of the material world, but is only a servant of the senses. So even here, Srila Prabhupada is specifically referring to spiritual knowledge. We also get knowledge from all the so-called academic institutions, schools, colleges, and universities, but none of those so-called knowledge, that knowledge can never remedy our material disease. The kind of education, the so-called education that we are getting from the so-called academic institutions, they only teach us about how we can become better than animals in the business of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Nothing beyond that. They have no answers about how we can liberate ourselves from this incessant cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. Regardless of the fact that maybe many of the self-proclaimed intellectuals, they often say that, okay, if spirituality is so important, if religion is so important, then why do you go to the hospital when you're sick? Why don't you go to the temple? A lot of self-proclaimed intellectuals might say things like that, but even the doctors who are treating the patients, even they are not immune to the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. When, with all due respect to doctors, even they themselves are often at a loss, especially nowadays with so many new types of diseases. And even during the pandemic, a lot of healthcare workers, doctors and nurses, they were also affected. So it is not that I want to degrade them, but even they themselves are not immune to the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. So the so-called education that we get from the so-called academic institutions, they can never, that type of education can never remedy our material disease. Only spiritual knowledge can provide answers to our real problems of life. And that's why Srila Prabhupada has specifically used this term, attainment of spiritual knowledge. Only by attaining spiritual knowledge, we can realize that we are not masters of the material world. But in this material world, we are only the servant of the senses. So the senses are also parts of the 24 Mahatattva elements. So even the Mahatattva elements, they are completely material. Everything that exists in this material world is nothing but dead matter. This material world itself, it appears to be lively and animate merely because of our presence. Because we are spirit souls, we the living entity, not just human beings, all the living entities. All the living entities in all the 84 lakh species of material bodies, we are all spirit souls, and only due to our presence in this material world appears to be lively. So without the presence of spirit souls in this material world, even this material world will be nothing but dead matter. So such is our current position. We were meant to be in a much more superior position. That is our original position in the spiritual world. But due to our foolishness, we have degraded ourselves to this current position of being the servant of the senses. At that time, he begs for the service of the Lord and thus becomes happy without being illusioned by so-called material happiness. So the one who is truly awakened, the one who is truly enlightened by spiritual knowledge, he will never be enslaved by this material contamination. He will never be illusioned by so-called material happiness. So that was the position of Maharaj Yudhishthira and the Pandavas generally, because they have seen everything. They were enjoying material opulence, and then they were also forced to go in exile, and again by the mercy of the Supreme Lord, they regain their material wealth. So the material opulence did not remain with them all the time. Only the mercy of the Supreme Lord guided them, and it helped them to cross over all their miseries. So the Pandavas themselves, they also realized that whatever opulence and their glorious position is only due to the mercy of the Supreme Lord, and therefore they were never bewildered or agitated by whatever material opulence that they were uh, having. Maharaj Yudhishthira was one of the liberated souls, and therefore for him there was no pleasure in a vast kingdom, good wife, obedient brothers, happy subjects, and prosperous world. These blessings automatically follow for a pure devotee, even though the devotee does not aspire for them. The example set herein is exactly suitable. It is said that one who is hungry is never satisfied by anything other than food. So, similarly, since we are spirit souls, our problems can only be solved through spiritual education. The so-called education from the so-called academic institutions, they can never, they do not even invoke the, uh, they do not even invoke at least the initial spark of spiritual inquiry. So it is only focused on how much material wealth we can gain. For what? No matter how much material wealth we gain, we are always going to be uh, going through the same problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. Even between the two milestones of Janma and Mrityu, we are always going to be suffering due to Jara and Vyadhi. So Jara is it's experienced by everyone, of course, but the unique thing about Vyadhi is that we do not just suffer due to our Vyadhi. The suffering is even worse when we are forced to see our loved ones suffer due to Vyadhi. So it is extremely important to learn how we can actually liberate ourselves from all these sufferings. If we do not utilize this wonderful opportunity which we have attained in this human form of life, then we are going to keep suffering, and we may not even have the chance to regain this position uh, to be able to engage in spiritual inquiry. So whether people acknowledge it or not, it is happening to everyone. No one is exempt from these four problems. However, it is quite amusing that people only tend to think about God when they face problems. Only when uh, only when someone is facing some severe disease, or when the person sees a family member suffering from a severe disease, only during that time the person starts to blame God for everything. But Krishna himself has made it so clear in Gita 8.15 that this place is nothing but Dukkalayam. So it is completely foolish to expect happiness here. We should only utilize this wonderful opportunity and always be engaged in devotional service so that we can cross over this ocean of material existence. So if we are qualified, we can enjoy happiness from where real happiness can be experienced, and that is not from this Dukkalayam. So that's why Krishna has made it so, he has made it crystal clear in Gita 8.15. So he has even given the essence of all the Upanishads in 700 Hare Krishna, am I audible?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, my screen is visible, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Krishna gave the essence of all the Upanishads in the most compact form in 700 verses. So even that was too much. So he came back as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He gave the 16-word Maha Mantra, but even that is a problem. It is so difficult to chant even that Maha Mantra. So such is the effect of Kali on Kali Jivas especially, but there is no other way as stated in the scriptures. So either we can choose to remain servants of our material senses, or we can utilize this human form of life to completely liberate ourselves from this material entanglement. But it is also it also depends on the mercy of Krishna, even to help us to perceive the evil of this endless cycle of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. Because as stated in Gita chapter 13, from verse number 8 to 12, in Gita chapter 13, from verse 8 to 12, Krishna talks about 20 aspects. He describes the 20 aspects which are regarded as knowledge, true knowledge. So in those 20 aspects, there's one of the aspects which he states is regarding Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshanu Darshanam. So only if we can find this only from spiritual knowledge. So even to give us the spiritual vision, so that we can perceive that Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi is evil. So even for that we need Krishna's mercy. So only by understanding that, only then we will endeavor towards liberating ourselves. Otherwise, we can always keep blaming God only when something bad happens. During all other times, we will completely forget God. So whenever we need some scapegoat to blame someone, so only then we'll start to think about God. So that is the typical Kali Jiva. The whole material world is full of hungry living beings. The hunger is not for good food, shelter, or sense gratification. The hunger is for the spiritual atmosphere. Due to ignorance only, they think that the world is dissatisfied because there's not sufficient food, shelter, defense, and objects of sense gratification. This is called illusion. When the living being is hungry for spiritual satisfaction, he is misrepresented by material hunger. But the foolish leaders cannot see that even the people who are most sumptuously materially satisfied are still hungry. And what is their hunger and poverty? This hunger is actually for spiritual food, spiritual shelter, spiritual defense, and spiritual sense gratification. So this spiritual hunger will always be there in all the living entities. Because as Krishna himself says in Gita 15.7, Mamai Jivaloke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Manashasandriyani Prakritistani Karshati. So our original position is that we are all spirit souls, and the spiritual hunger can only be eliminated through spiritual knowledge. These can be obtained in the association of the Supreme Spirit, Lord Sri Krishna, and therefore one who has them cannot be attracted by the so-called food, shelter, defense, and sense gratification of the material world, even if they are relished by the denizens of the heavenly planets. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita 8.16, it is said by the Lord that even in the topmost planet of the universe, namely the Brahmaloka, where the duration of life is multiplied by millions of years by Earth calculation, one cannot satisfy his hunger. Such hunger can be satisfied only when the living being is situated in immortality, which is attained in the spiritual sky far, far above the Brahmaloka, in the association of Lord Mukunda, the Lord who awards his devotees the transcendental pleasure of liberation. So here Brahmaloka refers to Satyaloka, the residence of Lord Brahma. So these verses from the Gita 8.16 onwards, from 8.16 to 8.19, they particularly describe the entire material universe, about how the material universe is created and annihilated again and again. So even regarding the material universe, there is a complete annihilation and also a partial annihilation. The partial annihilation takes place during every night of Brahma, but the complete annihilation takes place after Brahma's 100 years, which is equal to 311 trillion and 40 billion years of our human years. So Brahmaloka or Satyaloka is the topmost planet in the 14 planetary systems. The Swargaloka itself is just above this middle region of the universe. The Swargaloka is still below Brahmaloka. So even Lord Brahma himself is still in such a vulnerable position, meaning that even he is not immune from the problems of Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. Even he has to die after his 100 years. So the so-called material opulence, which is desired by the denizens of the heavenly planets, none of these could solve our problems. And for Maharaj Yudhishthira, for exalted devotees like the Pandavas, so they were always aware of the fact that the only true wealth is spiritual wealth. The only true wealth is Krishna's mercy. So such realization can only come from spiritual knowledge. And they were so exalted and they were so blessed that they got the spiritual knowledge from the Supreme Lord himself. Still, we are also fortunate that we have come to the association of the bona fide parampara through the spiritual masters, and we are also blessed through the ISKCON movement, because though Srila Prabhupada is no longer in this material world, he still lives through his words in all his lectures and his books. So we can always enjoy the association of our eternal Siksha Guru, Srila Prabhupada. So it is entirely up to us whether we want to utilize all these precious opportunities that are available to us to liberate ourselves from this material world, or whether we want to completely waste this precious human form of life. It is entirely up to us. Krishna will never interfere in our minute independence. So it is best if we, at least now, we should follow Krishna's instructions and not repeat our blunder as we did before. So that's all for today. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Okay. We'll meet again next week. Hare Krishna.